Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to the 80 books that I read in 2024. They're all back here except for the ones that were on Kindle and the one book that I lost somehow. I just sat down to edit and realized I forgot to talk about the book that I lost. Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. 4.5 star romance for me this year. I read some really unique books this year that I would have never expected to enjoy, and I also was writing my own book this year. So my original goal was 100 books and then I read 80 because when I was writing I was not reading as much. I read my own book like 3 times, but I still think that reading is so magical, and if you have not discovered the thing that you like to read, it's an exciting thing because it's probably out there, you just haven't found it yet, and maybe this video will bring you closer to that. So the first book I read in 2024 was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. You follow Emily Wilde to this icy sort of island where she wants to just be alone and study the fairies that are on this island, and then somehow her arch nemesis shows up to the island as well. His name is Wendell Bamblebee, and you get to watch their very silly and fun dynamic. I remember this book as being one of the most unique proclamations of love I've ever seen because they're enemies before and they don't just suddenly transform into these different characters when they realize that they're not actually enemies, and I just thought that was really funny. The only thing I didn't like about this book is that the plot gets a little bit in the weeds and it started to feel more like a fairy tale than an actual book. So I gave this 4 stars. If you like flowery writing and 2 nerdy characters who are enemies as well as a slight fantasy element, then you would really enjoy this book. And then I read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Whenever I think back to my reading this entire year, this book stands out. It's just one of the most memorable plot lines because it's so random and fascinating. A really popular author chokes on a pancake and dies, and a smaller author named June just so happened to be there while she was dying, took a peek around her apartment and saw a mostly finished manuscript, decided to steal it, edit it a little bit, and then publish it herself. And then you watch as people discuss her work online. People figure out that she more than plagiarized, like fully stole a manuscript. She publishes under the name June Song so that people think that she's ethnically ambiguous and not just white. It is really addicting to read because you're just watching a character make the most horrendous decisions ever, but it also just feels like you're on social media while reading it because it's so much about it. It feels like reading Reddit posts and then going through the internal dialogue of someone reading posts that are about themselves, and there's just never a good point in the book to put it down because it's you don't know what's ever going to happen next, and I definitely was not expecting what happened at the end. It gets a little bit magical realism-y. It's no longer constrained to the elements of our world by the end, I would say. I gave this 4 stars, but honestly, I highly recommend it. It's kind of like a thriller literary fiction book. I'll spend less time on books that I didn't enjoy that much. And next I read House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas, and I mostly got roped into reading the Crescent City series because of this book in particular and the last page of it. It's such a shocking plot twist, and everyone's reaction was just getting me through the 800 pages of the first book in this series and the 800 pages of this book. This is by far my least favorite Sarah J. Maas series ever. Drops a lot in comparison to Throne of Glass, and I honestly think I could have gone without reading it, but it was just so much hype on social media that if you're in the book world or you have a book algorithm, it just feels like there's only so long that you can resist. And I finally gave in. The last page is very shocking, and I think because I spent 1,600 pages to get to that last page, I gave it 4 stars, but I would never really recommend this series to anyone. The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. This is a literary fiction magical realism book. There's an author who lives on an island, and he wrote a very popular series, kind of, I was picturing like a Harry Potter series, and he wrote the last book in the series, but he's not willing to give anyone the manuscript, so he invites his biggest fans to come to the island and play a bunch of games that involve riddles, and whoever wins the riddles will get the final manuscript. There's also a little subplot of romance. There's some darker topics in here, but overall it's like a very warm, cozy feeling, and I feel like you could recommend this to anyone. I gave this 4.75 stars, very close to a 5 star. And then I got to read an early copy of The Rom-Commers by Catherine Center, and when you say the words rom-com, Catherine Center really writes a rom-com. The sentences are so quick-paced and zingy and funny, but she always puts something in there that really tugs at your heartstrings and makes the characters feel real. And in this one, you're following Emma, who is taking care of her dad, who's not like actively sick, but he had an accident a few years ago and he needs caretaking. So she dreams of being a screenwriter, but she never really gets around to it because she's taking care of her father. But then one day she gets an opportunity to fly to LA and help a very famous screenwriter fix his really horrible rom-com. And Charlie's like a rich director, screenplay writer dude from LA who's not used to anyone telling him what to do or collaborating, and he basically slams the door in her face that first day, but eventually they get to working together. The end of this book was just great. It was giving me whiplash because, I mean, you'll just have to find out. I highly recommend you read this book if you like rom-coms. There was no spice in this, I believe, and I gave it 4.75 stars. And then finally, for whatever reason, I picked up A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas because I made a video reading the ACOTAR series on my vlog channel like over a year ago now, and then I had DNF'd this one 200 pages into it, and as you can see, it's a lot more than 200 pages, and it just was bothering me that it was on my shelf and I couldn't say that I'd read the entire series. So I finished it and it was not very good in my opinion. The plot would have been really cool if we kept it with the plot, but it ended up just becoming a bunch of spy scenes, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And then I read Butcher and Blackbird by Brynn Weaver, which I was very curious about because this is about 2 serial killers, and it was just about as weird as you're probably thinking it is. I think this book was really funny, and I liked how he referred to her as the girl who always looks like she wants to run away. I don't know why I remember that so well. He owns a restaurant, I think, so I remember a bunch of scenes of them in restaurants. The suspense was really great in this novel. Like whenever they would tag team kill someone, it would put me on edge because I genuinely felt like someone was going to die at all times. The only thing with recommending this book is that there's like a 30-page spy scene in this book, which I have never seen before in a rom-com. So I would be weary to recommend it to you, so just know that going into it. But other than that, I thought it was a really great book and I gave it 4 stars. And then I read Same Time Next Summer by Annabelle Monaghan. This is one of my favorite books of the year. It's so small and cute and summery, and a lot of people, I think, will not like this book because she is planning her wedding with her fiance. She goes back to her hometown house to do it because her mom is gonna help her or something, and her next door neighbor is her childhood love, Wyatt, who just happens to be home. She can hear him playing guitar over there, and they meet up in the tree house that they used to have. It's just very cutesy, like childhood romance, and I feel like it really encapsulated that very well. And the fiance that she's with right now is a doctor, and he drinks green juices, and it's very much this adult life that she pictures that she should have. And a lot of people won't like this book because I can't remember if she was like straight up unfaithful during it or if she broke up with her fiance because she felt herself falling for her childhood love all over again. I usually am so strict about not liking that, but for whatever reason, this book, I gave it 4.5 stars. I remember reading it and just, it felt like my heart was actually being tugged. I couldn't go to bed until I knew that the main character was okay. Like I was rooting for her so much, and she writes these very simple sentences that pack a punch. She writes some of my favorite romances ever. They're a lot more adult and they're not necessarily rom-com, it's just romance, more on the literary fiction side. So if you're a little bit older or you don't like spice, I highly recommend her books. We're moving into February now. I read House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This thing is huge and it's in hardback because this got released in January, and like I said, if you have a book algorithm, this was all over it. I actually read a lot of this in an Apple Vision Pro for that video that I did, which was pretty cool, but I think that this book suffered from too many POVs, and I've noticed that a lot, especially with fantasy books. I don't like getting invested into a storyline and then switching storylines, especially when they don't overlap that much. I remember liking one character's POV towards the end, and other than that, I just wanted it to be over. It says I gave it 4 stars, but I genuinely feel like I'm incapable of rating a book lower than 4 stars when I spend this much time in the pages, especially it being the 3rd book in a series. But I just, like I said, I would not recommend this series to people. There are much better fantasy series. And then I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This is her first fantasy-esque romance, which it is basically just another rom-com, except he's a werewolf and she's a vampire, and there's a lot of politics when it comes to the werewolves and the vampires, but they get married for some reason because she has to, and I don't know why. It's probably because I grew up on Twilight. The trope of these creatures being disgusted by each other because he can't stand the smell of her, but he's actually not disgusted by her. He just wants her so bad that he looks disgusted. It's like Twilight for adults. Now, the one thing I did not like about this book, you can probably already guess, but there was some weird spice in here, okay? Because he is an animal, and I would like to forget that because it really just does not feel like he is an animal. The entire book, it feels like you're just reading about 2 human beings, and then they remind you in the spice scene that he is not a human being. So I could have gone without that for sure, but I am obsessed with Ali Hazelwood and all of her writing. She just writes angst so well, and her books are actually funny. So I ate this up and I gave it 4.5 stars. If Only I Had Her by Laura Nowlin. This book comes after If He Had Been With Me, which was like a young adult romance book, very angsty, very Tumblr-esque, and I gave that book 5 stars actually. It was a really cool plot. You start off with the tragedy right on the first page, and then you read what happens before leading up to that, and I just thought that was a really cool and risky choice. This book follows 2 different POVs. It is really sad, and I definitely could have gone without this book. It's kind of squeezing from the first plot. I gave it 3.75 stars. And then I went to Montana, and I thought, what better than to read Wildfire by Hannah Grace, because they are camp counselors. And I only know of this author because of the book Icebreaker, and that book is notorious for just having spice, so I haven't read that one, but I thought, oh, this one will give me like a taste for her writing, but be less spicy. I gave it 2 stars. Oh, 2.75. And I was still in Montana, so I thought, what better than to read Beartown by Frederick Bachman. Taking a hard left turn from Wildfire, this is a literary fiction book about a town held together by ice hockey. It follows a lot of different POVs like Frederick Bachman normally does, and it tackles a very serious topic of SA, so definitely look up the trigger warnings for this before you read it. His writing is amazing. I read Anxious People my first year of reading, and it's just one of those books that's so unique you can't really ever forget it, so I gave this 4 stars. I read The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I do remember reading this in high school, but reading it on your own accord is definitely a different experience, and I can't believe it was February because this is Texas for you. I went and laid out in the sun, and I came back with a huge sunburn on my leg because I was like facing the sun at a weird angle, and I sat down and read this book for like 4.5 hours straight. Did not want to move. It's just such a great summer book. I highly recommend. I would definitely reread it, and now I understand Great Gatsby references. This was from my Taylor Swift reading video, by the way. 5 stars. And then I read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I really should know how to say this by now. This is a classic, and I read this in my Reading Like Taylor Swift for a Week video because she wrote the song Tolerate It based off of this book. This is a gothic classic about a girl who gets married to this very rich man, and she starts getting haunted by his ex-wife Rebecca. It's definitely a trip to read this, and then reading the explanation at the back of the book made it all worth it for me. And it was definitely a slower classic, so unless you are ready to you know, read a classic, this one's not like a really fun and easy one, but I did give it 4 stars because that explanation at the end really made it worth it. I read Apples Never Fall by Leanne Moriarty. This became a show, and I actually got to go to the red carpet and interview the actors who play in the show, which was really awesome. So of course I had to read the book. It was really great, and this is a mystery about a mother who goes missing from this family. And if I'm being honest, I have more memories about being nervous for interviewing the actors than I do reading this book, and I also have more memories of the show. But it says I gave the book 3 stars. Oh, I do remember. I feel like this one just went on for way too long towards the end, but the show is great. I read Happily Never After by Lynn Painter. The concept of this is so fun. There's this guy who will professionally object at your wedding if you secretly for some reason want to pull out of your wedding, but you don't want to cause the drama. You can pay this man to object. So Sophie hires Max to object at her wedding, and then she wants to also be involved in the objecting business. So she does that, and it's a very slice of life type of romance book. Very fluffy, very cute. I give it 3 stars because it's just one of those fun little palette cleansers, but if you want one of them, Lynn Painter is the way to go. And then I read 2 5-star books back to back, and my year was starting to look up because I think this is my first 5-star, other than Great Gatsby, of the year. The Prisoner's Throne by Holly Black. This is the second book in the duology. It comes after the Cruel Prince trilogy. I feel like if you read books that made perfect sense, if you don't, it probably will feel confusing. But this is a fantasy series that I'm absolutely obsessed with. I think the way that she writes romance is one of my favorite ways anyone in the history of the world has ever written romance, because she writes it as hate, and love written as hate is my favorite thing ever. It's also the most magical world I've ever read before. I love Pham. I could read 20 more books set in this universe. There are like mythical creatures and human beings living in the same world, and the mythical creatures can be deceiving, they can trick you into stuff, and that dynamic is just so fun. 5 stars. I mean, this is like one of the last books in the series, so you've got to start with The Cruel Prince, because this one is about the little brother from that series. I need to reread that series soon. It's so good. And small caveat, I really disliked the first book because I was expecting like a romance series, and it's not. It's a fantasy series. Okay, go into it knowing it's a fantasy series. And then I read Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. This is another one of her STEM romances that I just never got around to reading, and I gave it 5 stars. They're just so fun. Same book, different characters' names, and I will read it 20 more times. It just works. So keep doing it, Ali, please. And then Kindle did this thing with a bunch of really popular romance authors where they released little novellas. So I read Ashley Poston's With Any Luck, and I gave it 3 stars. It was probably a 2-hour reading experience, and I just really liked that author from the 7-Year Slip. And for being a novella, I think it was really good. And then I read Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is a Regency historical fiction fantasy book. I watch a lot of other people who have this taste in books, and I was trying to have that taste in books, but this one just didn't do it for me. I think I really enjoy high stakes, and this is definitely considered cozy, but I do remember thinking it was genuinely funny, and the romance was really good, but all the other elements of it had me a little bit bored, so I gave it 3 stars. I read How to End a Love Story with Yulin Kwong. This is the producer of Emily Henry's Beach Read movie. I love this cover and the title, and the book was really great. There is a quote in this book about grief that I still think about to this day. She lost her sister in this book, which is a pretty big trigger warning, I think, for it, because it does discuss grief a lot. Okay, this quote actually doesn't make sense without the context of the story, but the sentiment is that she feels the loss of friendships more greatly now that she has lost her sister, and that was an emotion I didn't know I had till I read this book. Which, on a greater topic, I feel like is one of the most cool things about reading, is that you can be having an experience that you can't describe yourself, and then read it in a fictional story and have have it explain and be cathartic in your real life, that is just so cool. And you never know when it's gonna happen. I honestly would have loved this book so much, but the romance becomes like a weird friends with benefits situation. And I thought that they were just so genuinely romantic and had such a great connection that we didn't need to keep doing things that they know will not get them where they want to be. So I ended up giving it 3 stars, but the next time she publishes a book, which I hope is soon, I will definitely read it because I think she writes really beautifully. So that rating is more so based on the plot. Because thinking back, I actually really did like this book. And then I read The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. This is the first thriller I think I've read all year, other than Rebecca and Yellowface. This book had me actually scared at certain points, and this book is just eerie. After reading this, I was like, I don't know if I can do thriller anymore because I'm really sensitive, so I gave it 3 stars. And I mean sensitive to like killing. It just gets me. I read The Blonde Identity by Allie Carter, which I did not know is a play on James Bond, something like that. I don't know. This was like a spy romance thriller, and I was not invested in the characters very much, so I gave it 3 stars. But this book, I was very invested in the characters. The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. This is a thriller book. This might be a young adult thriller, but this is my perfect thriller where it's such a fast page turner. I had no issues with wanting to get on my phone because this book was so fast paced and I needed to know what was going to happen, but it's not gritty or eerie, or like, if you're sensitive to those types of things like me, it won't be too much for you. I gave this 5 stars. I highly recommend you read this if you want a fast-paced thriller. And I found it because of Book of the Month, who is the sponsor of today's video. I'm just obsessed with them. And if you don't know, they are a monthly book subscription service, and they have a team of readers who read a bunch of stuff and then pick the ones that they think you and I would like. And they are very good at their jobs because I always find something that I never would have known that I liked, which you'll see more in this video. I found completely new authors that I'd never heard about, even genres that I wouldn't really think to read, but because I just trust them so much, I have found so many new authors and books from them. So this month I got The Favorites by Lane Fargo. I've never heard of this author before, but this is about an ice skating scandal, and I just have a feeling that I'm really going to like this because I love the movie with Margot Robbie in it. I, Tonya. I love that movie so much, and if this book is anything like that movie, I think I'm gonna really like it. But they have picks for all different genres, and if there's nothing that you like that month, you can skip it for free. You can also use your credit for an audiobook, which I've done like twice now, and I genuinely rely on them to find new authors that I love all the time. Plus, they're hardback, so they look really great on my shelf at a really great price. So if you want to sign up, you can use my link and use the code NEWYOU, and you'll get your first Book of the Month book for $5, which is crazy because it's a hardback, and I highly recommend them. I'll leave the link. Don't forget to use the code, and thank you so much, Book of the Month, for sponsoring this video. I then read The Rule Book by Sarah Adams. I gave this 3 stars, and then I read Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh. This is, in fact, the old indie cover. It just feels like a textbook, but then it has these people on the cover, and you realize that's definitely not a textbook. This is an emotional romance book at its absolute finest, and I shockingly gave it 4.25 stars. People are not going to like this review of this one. I read Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This was one of his secret fantasy books that he wrote for his wife that he has now published, kind of like The Princess Bride, I've been told, which I've not seen, which I know everyone will yell at me in the comments that how have I not seen that movie? I don't know. I gave this 3 stars. It really dragged for me. I still think about the magic system in this book whenever I wash my dishes, because it's like based off of anything that is wet will create spores that can kill you, and it really was freaky, and so I still think about that to this day, but this one did not do it for me. And then I have this book that's a bind up of 3 short stories by Allie Hazelwood, and I read the middle one in here, Stuck With You, and they get stuck in an elevator, which is actually one of my biggest fears, but it was a great little romance novella. Oh, I gave that 4 stars. That's pretty good for a novella. And then Funny Story by Emily Henry came out. It's just the best day ever every April when her new books come out, but it also comes with a sense of fear because I love her books so much that I feel like I need to temper myself while reading them, but I didn't need to. It was 5 stars. Absolutely love Miles and Daphne. Also, what a great name, Daphne. And then during a 24-hour reading challenge in a book-themed hotel with Sarah and Destiny, I read Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen. She's actually a very popular podcast narrator, and this book is about a podcast narrator, which I thought was really fun and really unique. She also has an eye patch that you don't hear about why she wears one until later in the book, and I thought that was really cool. And I really loved the romance in this book. It was really fast paced, but I really loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. Really great rom-com. And then I read Love Interest by Claire Gilmore, purely based off of the cover and knowing that it was set in New York City. And I ended up just randomly relating to so many weird niche details in this book, and I think that's why I enjoyed it so much. The characters get close because they work in the same office building, and for some reason they have to do like a YouTube series together. This was her debut novel, which is so impressive. Congratulations, Claire Gilmore, because you're really good at writing. I was just really invested the whole time, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. stars. And then I read Powerful by Lauren Roberts, which is a little novella after the first book, Powerless, this is like a fantasy romance series. And this was a good novella. I feel like it is difficult to make a novella about a side character this interesting, but it was fast-paced all the way through. I was very invested. I love that we're following a character who's like in this magical world but doesn't want to fight, because that would probably be me. And I gave this one 4 stars. Moving into May. I read The Ministry of Time by Kaylee Ann Bradley. And surprise, surprise, I only read this book because it was a book of the month book. Probably would not have picked it up otherwise, like genuinely. I saw the cover and almost thought it was like a nonfiction. I just didn't really understand what it was about. And boy, did it just blow up my entire world. This book is a genre bender. And a lot of people will not like it because it does not commit to a single genre. But it worked for me so well. Too well. It's one of my favorite books of the year, okay? That's a spoiler. It's my favorite books of 2024. It's so good. I have a vlog where I'm reading this book, had no idea I would love it this much, and you can just see how affected I am. I can hardly even film the video. The UK government has figured out time travel. People who are going to die in different timelines, they pluck them out, put them in an apartment with someone that they assign. So you follow our nameless main character as she gets assigned to an 1800s naval officer named Graham Gore. The way that she writes, it gives me chills just thinking about it. It makes me want to run marathons thinking about the way that she writes. She takes the English language and makes it her pet. She's like, oh, words, those are easy and I can manipulate them any way that I want to. She can describe the most mundane thing and it's so cool because that's just how she writes things. The author herself is partially Cambodian, but you might not be able to tell that just by looking at her. So there's a lot of discussion about not looking like your parents or having parents who come from a different country, which really hit home for me. And I think if that's the case for you, it would also really hit home for you. Possibly. I mean, I don't know. It did for me. The romance was so angsty. And then right at the end you go, oh yeah, this is a sci-fi book, and the plot picks up again and it becomes really fast-paced. The plot twist got me so much. So because of all of those factors, like a 6-star read for me, and I absolutely loved it. And the overall theme about grief being time travel, about forgiveness being time travel, about hope being time travel, it blew me away and I love it. A lot of people that don't like it wish that it was just a sci-fi book and it was like all about plot, or they wish it was like a romance book or a literary fiction book, and it's just all 3 of those things, and it kind of like forgets what it is halfway through, and I loved it. I just did not care. Although I do remember it starts off slow. I think I read 70 pages of this book and considered DNFing it, which is just so crazy to remember back knowing now that it's like my favorite book of the year. But if any of those things sound interesting to you and you're not expecting it to be like super snappy right off the bat, but you really enjoy cool, flowery writing, I think you'll really like this book. 6 stars. And then to stay on theme with sci-fi, I read Iron Gold by Pierce Brown. This is the 4th book in the Red Rising series, which is one of the only sci-fi series I've ever read, but also one of my favorite series that I've ever read. This is the first one where it becomes a more expansive series where you're following multiple POVs, which, like I said earlier, multiple POVs sometimes really takes me out of books, and I did experience that a little bit for this one. It dragged a lot, but then again, I love Pierce Brown and his writing and his characters, and I gave it 5 stars because I am required to at this point. But reading the next book feels impossible at this point, I will not lie. It becomes a more grim, dark sci-fi series, as they say. So more gory, I think is what that means. After that, I thought, why not reread Happy Place by Emily Henry? Because I think I was missing Funny Story at the time. It was May, it was still spring, and I wanted to read something that I just knew I would love. And then I actually went through and annotated this one, which was really fun for me. I forgot how angsty this book was and how many flashbacks you get. I think this is the book where she talks about the past tense the most, which was interesting. I had forgotten about that, but it was still a 5-star read. And then I read This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune, and then I knocked over my water bottle onto it in the middle of the night, and it looks like this. Things I liked: the setting of Prince Edward Island and the oyster shucking and the summery vibes. Things I did not like: the secret that she kept from her friend that you're waiting to find out about for the entire book, and some of the romance. Those things were pretty at odds, so I gave it 3.75 stars, but you best believe I'm probably gonna read the next book that she publishes, and I'm probably gonna like it. And then I read Love Redesigned by Lauren Asher. This is a very popular romance author, especially on like TikTok and stuff, and I had never read any of her books, and I gave this one 2 stars. It just was not my style of writing. The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. Loved the summer vibes. It was very funny. Quite spicy for a Christina Lauren, although maybe they've always been like that and I just forgot to notice until now. Ow, I just hit myself. I gave this one 4.5 stars. The sun is setting. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Moving into June with an absolute banger. Just Last Night by Vara McFarlane. Similarly to reading Ministry of Time, had no expectations going in, wasn't expecting to read it or like it, and then completely blew me out of the water. This book is a 6-star read for me. And something you've got to remember if you pick up one of her books is that she is from Scotland and she uses some slang sometimes, so it takes you a second to like get into her voice and understand what she's saying, because she'll also like reference things that she just expects everyone to know about, and I'm so so bad at references that for a long time I felt lost while reading her books, but once you get past that, you just kind of go, oh, that's a reference I don't know. It doesn't really matter. You keep reading. This book was phenomenal. This one is so heavily about grief. It's very sad, but I think it's very cathartic. But she describes a lot of the phases of grief very well, and also the very intricate dynamics of a friend group, what it's like to learn about secrets after someone has passed away. And then about halfway through the book, you start getting a romance subplot that had me actually laughing out loud and kicking my feet. The most quotations I've ever underlined in a book ever goes to this book. And there's this one scene in particular that I can never get out of my head where she's pretending to take a photo of like this monument, but really she's just trying to get a photo of the love interest, and he notices and looks at it, and it's just so cute. It is so cute. It is so freaking cute. 6 stars, and you will see after reading this book, I tried to read her entire backlog because why did no one tell me to read her books? Filming these videos feels like going on a long run and playing a hard chess game. It's mental dexterity combined with physical exertion. I read Seven Summer Weekends by Jane L. Rosen. Great cover. I gave this 3 stars. And then I read Set on You by Amy Lee. I gave this 3.5 stars. If you want a more detailed review of those books, I read them in Stalking My Favorite Authors and then reading their favorite books. And then I read Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. I got tricked into reading erotica because Ali Hazelwood is one of my favorite authors and she decided to write erotica, and so I'm the fool that picks it up. That's not my genre, not my thing, so I don't personally recommend it, but I'm very excited for her book next year. But a book I did love is Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan. This is the one that she released this year. I love her covers and I love her books. This one started off slower for me actually. She is grieving her mom and she's in the middle of a divorce and she's been a mom for a while and she's just kind of lost her sparkle. And she has a cute meet cute with a guy at the dog park because her dog pees on him, and he's like this skateboarding, fun-loving dude who the town loves. And then it turns out this man is actually more in the circle of her friends' lives than she remembers, which was a fun little trope. And then you just watch a very sweet romance and like what it's like for a mom to have a second chance love. And it was just simple and sweet and cute and healthy and summery. And I gave it 4.5 stars. Highly recommend. And then I read a novel, Love Story by Ashley Poston, which after we all read 7 Year Slip last year and most of us put it in our favorite books of the year list, was really looking forward to this one, especially because the premise is so cool. She like accidentally transports into her favorite small town romance book series. Coolest premise ever, but I did not like the characters of the town that much. They felt very fictional, which like obviously that's kind of the point because she got put into her fictional book town, but I never got attached to any of them, which was very necessary for the plot to work. And I also did not like the romance. It came out of nowhere and he starts calling her like sweetheart or something. I can't remember what he calls her that I thought was so cringy. It disappointed me greatly, unfortunately, and I gave it 3 stars, but I'm excited for what she comes out next because I still have a lot of faith in her. And then I read Happiness for Beginners by Catherine Center. This is one of her older books that I had never read because it's about a very intense camping trip in Wyoming because I think she's in the middle of a divorce, but her little brother's best friend happens to also go on this camping trip. The little romance that happens like right at the beginning was one of the cutest scenes I've ever read in my entire life. And then the middle of the book is like that very intense camping trip with some very interesting and funny characters. And it had my heart racing at some points when someone doesn't follow the rules, something goes wrong, and then the end very quickly ties up the romance. So her books are very much more like literary fiction with romance subplots, but the romance subplots are so cute. And I gave this 4.5 stars. I highly recommend this book. It's so cute, so good. There's no spice. Oh, I gave that 4.75 stars. It's also a movie on Netflix, which was really bad. I don't recommend watching that. Moving into July, this is when I pretty much wrote my entire first draft of my manuscript, so I'm shocked that I got any reading at all. I managed to read Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth. This is a thriller, and I really didn't like it that much. I gave this 3 stars. After reading this, I was like, I don't know if thrillers are my thing this year anymore. And then I reread People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I was just tearing through the rereads. I didn't want to pick up new books while I was writing, so this was just a comfort read for me. Still 5 stars. And then I read 1 Star Romance by Laura Henkin. This is not a romance book. It's definitely a literary fiction book, and there's huge time gaps where they just jump like a year and a half later, blah, 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 years later. So jarring, but I loved it. She's an aspiring author. He's a dude who rates her book 1 star. And sometimes a romance that's written in a literary fiction style is so fun. So I gave it 4.5 stars. Somehow, some way, this year I read Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. I gave it 4 stars because it's such an iconic story, and mostly I gave it 4 stars because I was so proud of myself for getting through this book. The plot twists were great and everything, but I think I was craving more magic, which I've heard happens more so later in the series, but I don't think I'm gonna put in the effort to keep reading it. And then Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. This is a romance book. It was very sweet. It was an accidental pregnancy trope, which I had never read, and it was cool, but I think at this point in the year I was starting to really enjoy literary fiction writing better, and so this one did not hit for me like I think it would have used to. But I gave it 3.5 stars. Don't think it was a bad book at all. At all. Moving into August, I said I read my own book, and then I read Heartless Hunter by Kristen Cicerelli, which is a fun fantasy romance book. I feel like I really was not reading fantasy that much this year, even though in my head I like fantasy because I have a history of really liking certain fantasy series, but I really just wasn't in the groove of reading it. So this was kind of one of my first ones, and I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. This is one of the most unique books I read all year. It's a literary fiction with magical realism where every time she goes into her attic, a new husband comes down the stairs, and we get to see over 200 husbands, and it's weird and it's wacky, and I wanted a lot more from it. I wanted some sort of theme or character arc to happen. I feel like she was not changed by the end of the book, which was a letdown for sure, but it was entertaining all the way through. I have to give it that. 3.5 stars. 3.5 stars for that one. The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer. I was told this was Narnia. It was not that. I gave this book 3 stars. I was just very disappointed for so much of it because the magical parts were not magical, and I was really looking forward to the magic. I read The X-Files by Jessica Joyce on my Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy of it. I gave it 3 stars. The beginning hit for me so well, and then it fell off for the rest of the book. I don't know why. And then I think this is one of the only non-fictions I read all year. What I talk about when I talk about running by Murakami, very popular author that I've not read anything about, but he talks about marathon running as well as being an author, and I like to run, and I was writing, so I thought that would be really fun. And it was just a really good palate cleanser. It was a very easy read of like his journals, and if you're into those 2 niche things, then I think you would like it. I gave it 3 stars. And then I did myself a favor and picked up my second Vari McFarlane book, Between Us. This one is so good. It starts with a prologue, which I think she should not have made the prologue because it's so confusing that I tried to read it and then put it down for like a year and a half. And I've seen friends have similar reactions where they're just like, I don't know what's going on. Push past the prologue. Trust me, it details what a toxic relationship is like. Has some of the funniest scenes I have ever read from a book in my entire life of a friend group, and awkward things happen, and famous people and TV shows and what's real and what's fake, and it was 5 stars. And the Vari McFarlane obsession continued because she was hitting 2 out of 2 home runs for me, and it did not stop here, folks. I read Reckless by Lauren Roberts, the second book in that fantasy romance series, and this was so fun. The last chapter is so good. I cannot wait for the 3rd one to come out. If you just want a fun fantasy romance series, no spice, 5 stars. It just gives that reminiscent middle school vibe where you just love reading and you're a kid and you're flipping the pages, and TikTok didn't even exist to distract you. And then I read Mad About You by Vari McFarlane, and it was also 5 stars. This one, she moves in with a guy because she just got out of a very long-term relationship, and she realizes that the guy was the groom at the wedding she was supposed to photograph, and he ran out on his bride. What plausible explanation could he have for that? She will find out. And then I read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna because I enjoy pain. I read this because I was going to go to Paris for the first time ever, and this is a historical fiction. I feel like everyone knows what this book is about, but it's a historical fiction about 2 sisters during World War II in Germany, and I absolutely bawled my eyes out. This book has made me cry more than any piece of media I think ever, other than that one dog movie as a kid that I watched. I can't remember what it's called, but this is gonna be made into a movie with the Fanning sisters, and I'm so excited about that. 5 stars. Like I said, I was gonna go to Paris, so I read The Little Paris Bookshop by Nina George. I had never heard of this. I got this recommendation off of Reddit. This has some of the most beautiful quotes I've ever read, but the overall story I gave 2 stars. But I got some of my favorite clips ever in this video, thanks to the quotes in this book, so I gotta give it credit for that. What You Wish For by Catherine Center, another one of her older books in the backlog. This one has some trigger warnings, some things I was not expecting to read in a book, but it follows the brother from Happiness for Beginners. Also wasn't expecting that, which was really cool. And I gave this one 4 stars. It definitely feels like the time period that it was written in, at least fashion-wise. Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Myrer. This is a fantasy romance that I thought would never get off of my shelf, and then once I was reading it, I was kicking my feet and laughing and having such a good time. It just felt like watching a little TV show. She's literally the assistant to a villain. Kind of like if Despicable Me was romantic. I've never thought about that comparison until right now, but this really caught me off guard with how much I liked it. So I gave it 4.25 stars. And then I was still trying to read some fantasy off of my shelf, so I read Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent. This thing is so thick. She's known for being like the queen of fantasy romance, and I gave this one 4 stars. It did not stick with me, but it was a good time while I was reading it. If I Never Met You by guess who? Vari McFarlane. This one is so much office workplace drama, which was angering, but entertaining, but frustrating. Oof. Her ex in this book is very frustrating. This is the only Vari McFarlane book I did not give 5 stars this year. I gave it 4 stars, which is still a very high rating. In October, I read Nothing Like the Movies by Lynn Painter. Was so excited for this book to come out. This is the second book to Better Than the Movies, which is a young adult romance. Wes and Liz go to college, and you get his POV in this one. I haven't read a book that's just a good, like, college experience. She just captures what it's like to be a young person really well and in a really fun way, and it's genuinely romantic. And I gave it 4.25 stars because I missed these characters. And then I read Definitely Better Now by Ava Robinson. This is one of the coolest covers I think I've seen all year. This is a literary fiction book about a girl who is a recovering alcoholic. It really takes you along the journey for being in a program that is similar to AA. It's not that actual program, and what it's like for her to be just recovering from that, the difficult relationship that she has with her father. This is set in New York City, I'm pretty sure, and it also has a subplot of romance, and I really liked this book. There was a quote that I highlighted and posted on my story. This was her debut book, I think, as well, which is really impressive. It's definitely a heavier book, but I found it really insightful and interesting, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And then I read Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. This is a romantic comedy with an accidental pregnancy trope set in New York City, and I thought it was really sweet and wholesome, and I gave it 4 stars. In November, it says I read my own book again, but then I read Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. This book is heavy physically and emotionally with trigger warnings that you should read. I gave it 4.25 stars. I read Powerless by Elsie Silver, and I gave it 2 stars. What was that? You Again by Kate Goldbeck. One of the best covers. Apparently this is a Hallie Met Sally. When Harry Met Sally? Clearly I haven't watched the movie. I really want to though. I didn't know that this book was based off of that, but this book caught me off guard so much. It was kind of written like a literary fiction book, which was really getting me towards the end of the year, so I gave it 4.5 stars. Taking it back to like 2013 or something, I read Who Is That Girl by Vari McFarlane because she came out with a book in 2024 that was the second book to this one, so I had to go back and read this one, and I gave it 4.5 stars. This is the trope where he's famous and she's not, and I ate it up. Here's that second book I was talking about, You Belong With Me, still about the same couple from that first book, which was really interesting because you're already following a couple. You're not just waiting for them to get together. You're just following the dynamic of how difficult it is to be in a long distance relationship where he's famous and you're not. And once again, I ate it up, 4.5 stars. We're in December. I read Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. Did a video pretty recently on this that you can watch, but I gave it 2.5 stars. Emma of 83rd Street by Audrey Bellezza and Emily Harding. This is your classic rom-com set in New York City, and she's rich. Who doesn't love reading about rich characters in New York City? Apparently me, because I gave this 3.5 stars. It's actually not a low rating at all. I just thought it was going to be more literary fiction and it wasn't, which is on me. The Wedding People by Allison S. Pack, a literary fiction book about a woman who wants to end her life. She checks into a hotel and then she gets wrapped up into this huge $1 million wedding with a very interesting main character, and the way that she views her life gets changed, the way that other people view their lives because of her existence changes, which I thought was really beautiful, but very heavy book, and it wasn't revolutionary enough by the end of enduring the pain that I felt while reading this book, so I gave it 3.5 stars. It's uplifting at the end though. Margot's Got Money Troubles by Rufie Thorpe. I've never read a book by this author, and she can write so well. I've never read a book with POVs that switch from first to third to second, and this is about a young Margot who gets impregnated by her gross older English professor at college. She gets pregnant and she wants to keep the baby, so she drops out of college and she picks up some work online on a website that I cannot say on my channel, but it's like a subscription-based website type vibe. You follow her through the events of that and what it takes to be a single mother, and the relationship between her and her ex-pro wrestler father, who she used to be estranged with but then ends up moving in with her. And honestly, for the writing alone is why I rated it so high. I gave it a 4 stars, but I want to read more work by this author because it was so good. And then I read The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Allie Carter, which she's the same author as The Blonde Identity earlier, so she likes to do very themed books that kind of feel like movies, because this one gets compared to Knives Out but Christmas edition, and it was so good. Like next time, well, it's still kind of winter if you're watching this, so I think it's still a great read, but maybe before next Christmas I would highly recommend this because it's like a romance, mystery, cozy, snowed in, Knives Out plot, and it was really great. I gave it 4 stars. And the last book that I read of 2024 is, I feel like none of you guys will guess this actually, Daisy Hates by Jessa Hastings. This is a romance book. This is the indie cover. It has since been traditionally published, so you might recognize it by a different cover, but this is the second book in the Magnolia Park series universe. I don't know what the official name of it is. For context, I read Magnolia Parks, the first book in this series, like 2 years ago, and it's a very toxic relationship, so I really did not like it, but the writing is very unique and I remember that, and you're following a bunch of really rich characters who live in London, Julian. And in this one, you're following Daisy and her brother Julian, and he's like an art stealer. Probably the closest thing I've ever read to a mafia romance. Having the context that all of these relationships are going to be toxic and the dynamics are not going to be normal, but that you read it for the drama and the yearning and the occasional amazing quote, because her writing is very lyrical and I love a good lyrical, flowery, dramatic writing. So, surprise, surprise, I gave this 4 stars. It was my 80th book of the year, and I'm now reading the 3rd book in that series. Guys, here's all the books. It's been a great reading year. If you want to keep updated with how my book writing is going when it gets released, that is on my Instagram at Pham. Let me know your favorite book of the year, and I will see you guys somewhere else on the internet. Bye.